Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. Pew, pew. I've got no rhythm. Today I'm going to do a discussion video, which I don't do very much, and it's about what I call my book, Monogamy. And this is kind of how I've been for the last 20 plus years or more, since I started reading properly for pleasure rather than for school or something else, where I just made a deal with myself that I would start a book and read it all the way through to the end. And partly because I think a lot of my reading is momentum based, my enjoyment of reading. I just have to keep moving, and if I get bogged down in something, is a problem for me, and so I just always try to keep moving forwards. And then that ties in with my other promise that I made to the authors that I read, that I would, if I start something, I'm going to read it start to finish, and I've followed that through for the most part. I remember when I joined BookTube, one of the first comments I got from people was, well, now that you're part of BookTube, you won't be such a monogamous reader because there's all sorts of activities and buddy reads and stuff like that going on. And 2.5 years in, I don't really participate. I don't participate at all in buddy reads because of the way I read. It's just not, maybe I'm a selfish reader, but I pick up a book, I read it from the start to finish. Sometimes it takes me a long time. It usually takes me not such a long time. So like even a 1,000-page book, if I'm reading a trollop, that might be 7 or 8 days reading time from start to finish, broken up in 3 or 4 spurts. The longest thing I had in the last few years was Duck's New Report, which took me a month to get through. It was a very dense read. This week I read a book that was just over 700 pages, and I read it in 2 or 3 days. So it wasn't that I got bogged down in this book, but I think the author and the work itself was not well served by my book Monogamy, and that's partly because it's a collection of short stories. And the particular book I'm talking about is the collected short stories of Lydia Davis, which came out a few years ago. Ms. Davis is still alive, publishing short stories, and also she works as a translator. And this was a collection that came out in 2013. So she'd been publishing short story collections every few years before then, and this collected 4 of her short story collections, not the first 4, I think 2 through 5, if looking through her biog. So within this are 4, I think, complete collections of her short stories. Break It Down, which came out in 1986. Samuel Johnson is Indignant, came out in 2001. 1986, Break It Down. 1997, Almost No Memory. So that's 11 years after that. Then 2001, so 4 years after that, is Samuel Johnson is Indignant. And then 2007, Varieties of Disturbance. So 4, I think, complete short story collections, all collected in this one book, The Collected Stories of Lydia Davis. It says here, winner of the Man Booker International Prize. Man Booker International is per book. It's not like a Nobel Prize given for work. So this collection was given a prize, and she's published short story collections since. I think there was one earlier than the first one here. Anyway, that's what I want to tell you. Now, these are works of short fiction, some of them as short as 1 sentence, and some of them longer. Let me give you an example. So for example, that's an entire story on this page, The Mother. And there are some which are even shorter than that, and then there are some which are 1 page, some run over 2 pages, and then 1 or 2 that run 30 or 40 pages. In all, I would say on average, there's a very short one called Companion, and this is the entire story, Companion. We are sitting here together, my digestion and I. I am reading a book, and it is working away at the lunch I ate a little while ago. Yeah, so that's kind of the tone. It doesn't really give you the tone of the thing at all. That's very glib to say. But a lot of these are very short stories, not dialogue heavy. They are stories of the mind, considerations. If they're telling stories about people, it's stories about their lives and lives over time and what happened, or vignettes, and perfectly readable. So I guess some of this might be considered flash fiction, if I'm using that term correctly, and then some of them are short stories like I'm used to. So here's my point. I read this from cover to cover. There are, in 700 pages, I think average sort of 3 to 4 pages a story. So, that's the best part of 100 short stories, if not more. I don't know if that might be more than 100 short stories in here. As I say, reading cover to cover, I don't think serves the work or the author particularly well. There are repeated themes and ideas, and when I read all of them in 2 or 3 days, I felt there was some repetition, I'm just not sure whether my book Monogamy was the right way to look at a work like this. And I'm not sure how I would do it differently still. I've had examples of short story collections where I have read the whole thing in one sort of bind up version. As I say, this was originally published in 4 different collections. I'm not sure if I'd read one of these collections whether I would go on to read the others. I read all 4 because it was in one book, and that's just sort of my OCD. Like I started and so I finished it. I've had better experiences with collections like this. So, for example, way back when Robert Altman put out his movie Shortcuts, which was based on a handful of Raymond Carver short stories, they had published this. This is Harville Secker, I think, or HarperCollins, whichever it is, published this collection, which £8.99. This cost me a lot of money back in 1993 for me. So young married in my early 20s, and I went out and bought this and read the whole thing cover to cover and had this tremendous holistic experience with Carver as a writer. And this, I think, again, I'm not sure if this is like a best of or whether it's calling it the selected stories. But I think it includes stories from a number of different collections. The stories in this collection are arranged generally in chronological order. A number of them were revised by the author for this edition. Okay, so from a bunch of different collections, this was like 420 pages worth, and I had a good experience with that. I also read Edith Perlman's Binocular Vision, also short stories, new and selected. So again, this was not a complete list of all stories that had been previously published, but they were selected, and this actually won an award, right? This was the National Book Critics Circle Award. It was a National Book Award finalist. I was a Los Angeles Book Prize finalist, and then won the National Book Critics Circle Award in whatever year this was, and that's what prompted me to get it. I was a prize winner, came to the list, and I read this, and I've since read another collection she published after this, which I've got up there somewhere. Anyway, so in both these cases of selected stories, I read them as one big, oh, look how moldy that is. I read these each as standalone cover-to-cover collection of short stories and got this holistic sense of who the author was and my reaction to the stories, both cases positive. In this instance, I think it was a little overkill, and so I feel that I didn't serve it so well. I do these kind of bind-up readings often, usually, so these are short stories, so I'm not sure I'm reading short stories the way they should really be savoured, even though I tend with fiction to have a sort of holistic, and even collections of essays, to have a holistic sense of my appreciation for it. So I'm not sure that would have changed so much. This was just a lot. There was a lot of it, and I don't know if I've done Lydia Davis a service. I read occasionally if there's a new, like a series fiction. I have on several occasions read a bind up of the first 3 in a series, and when I buy such things, I read them all in one go. So here's an example here, V.I. Warshawski. These were the first 3 in the V.I. Warshawski series by Sarah Paretsky. So I was looking for detectives written by women, and V.I. Warshawski is one of the most famous ones. There was a movie made with the title V.I. Warshawski with Kathleen Turner back in the day. And this is the first 3 books: Indemnity Only, Deadlock, Killing Orders. And I came to this, read all 3. For several reasons. I like reading these bind-ups. One, because you really get into the thick of it with the series character, and you get to know whether this is something you want to pursue. And with this one, I found them a little doughy, and didn't love it, and haven't gone on to read more. But then I have another example here, Sue Grafton, the famous alphabet stories. So this is a bind-up hardback, beautiful hardback bind-up of A is for Alibi, B is for Burglar, and C is for Corpse, which I read round the pool on holiday last year. And this was, all 3 books together came to 750 pages odd. So it's 250 page a detective story is good going. But I read all 3 in one go. And when I do these things, I read them from cover to cover. So I read one, pause, start the second one straight away. And I don't normally, I wouldn't normally buy, if I bought them separately, I wouldn't read A and then immediately read Beef Burglar and then go on. But having bought it in one edition, I don't stop and leave a bookmark in or remember that I read I just plow through. And this one, I did have a great experience. It's a great introduction, Kinsey Milhone. And they actually have, in these editions, I find them on eBay. This cost me like £3 or £4 on eBay. But they have DEF and GHI. I don't have all the way to Y. Famously, she never published Z or Z. But I can get more of these. I think they'll look great on the shelves when I get to them. So occasionally, this sort of bound up version of Daniel's book Monogamy, where he has to read the whole thing from cover to cover, even though it's 3 separate books. Occasionally that works for me. Short stories, I've had some hits and misses. So that was my experience with the collected stories of Lydia Davis. I apologize to Ms. Davis because I'm not sure this is the best way to appreciate it. I felt like I got the themes. I felt like I got the idea of the kind of things she writes. I'm not sure it's entirely my thing, but I readable enough that I got through 700 pages in a couple of days. One big Shabbat, and there was also Passover in the middle of last week, so I had a day to do that as well. But that was it. So what I want to hear from you guys is, why am I still wrong to be book monogamous? It works for me most of the time because it keeps me moving forward. Even if I find myself in a book that I'm not enjoying, I can plow through and know that something else is going to come along. But I'm not sure it's the right way to read poetry, to read short stories. I read last week, I haven't spoken about it yet, a complete collection of plays, which was everything the playwright had published. And I read them all, one after the other, all in one go, the collected plays from cover to cover. And that did kind of work, because actually it was everything he published in his lifetime, and got to see the entire arc, sadly cut short because he died tragically young. But that did kind of work for me as a bind-up. So I'd love to hear from you, how you approach these things, what you do with short story collections, whether this is a collection of collections, or even just a standalone short story collection. Even the last George Saunders that I read felt like reading it all in one go was not savouring it, and not. So how do you approach short stories? How do you read poetry? I guess I haven't even spoken about it here. So let's keep saying, how do you read short stories? Am I doing it wrong? Suggestions for how I could do this better. Hope you're keeping well. God bless. Bye.